الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. So, Bismillah, we have reached the sixth chapter. There's one more chapter after this. Was a short chapter on the intellect, which we have. This is actually the most extensive section, and or at least I think maybe it's a little less than the first one. But this is how to discern the signs of scholars of the Achara and bad scholars. So this is a dangerous chapter. He says, رحمه الله ورضي الله عنه: قد ذكرنا ما ورد من فضائل العلم والعلماء، وقد ورد في العلماء السوء تشديدات عظيمة دلت على أنهم أشد الخلق عذابا يوم القيامة. So he said, we have mentioned the virtues of knowledge and of scholars, and then we talked about what has been mentioned about the bad ulama, and those harsh statements that indicate that they will have the greatest punishment on the Day of Judgment. And then he said, but it's important, فَمِنَ الْمُهِمَّاتِ الْعَظِيمَةِ مَعْرِفَةَ الْعَلَامَاتِ الْفَارِقَةِ بَيْنَ عُلَمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا وَعُلَمَاءِ الْآخِرَةِ. So amongst the most important things is to know the signs in which you can distinguish between the worldly scholars and the other worldly scholars. وَنَعْنِي بِعُلَمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا عُلَمَاءِ السُّوءِ. And we mean by the worldly scholars, the bad scholars, the evil scholars. الَّذِينَ قَصْدُهُمْ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ يَتَنَعُّمُ بِالدُّنْيَا. Those who make their intention behind knowledge is to enjoy this world and to achieve stature and rank with the people of this world. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ عَذَابًا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ عَالِمٌ لَمْ يَنْفَعُهُ اللَّهُ بِعِلْمِهِ. The one who has the worst punishment on the Day of Judgment is a scholar who was not benefited, God did not benefit him by his knowledge. Imam al-Tabarani relates that. He also says, لا يكون المرء عالما حتى يكون بعلمه عاملا. A man will not be considered a scholar until he acts according to his knowledge. He also said, العلم علمان علم على اللسان فذلك حجة الله تعالى على ابن آدم وعلم في القلب فذلك العلم النافع. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi relates that, and Ibn Abd al-Barr, that the Prophet ﷺ said there are two types of knowledge. A knowledge on the tongue, and this is God's proof against the children of Adam. So when you hear something that's true, it's a proof for or against you. For you if you take it to heart and act according to it. Against you if you ignore it or reject it. And then a knowledge in the heart, and that is the truly beneficial knowledge. He also said, يَكُونُ فِي آخِرِ الزَّمَانِ عُبَّادٌ جُهَالٌ وَعُلَمَاءُ فُسَّاقٌ. That there will be towards the end of time, Al-Hakim relates this, and Abu Na'im, there will be towards the end of time ignorant worshippers and profligate scholars. So, عُبَّادٌ جُهَالٌ and عُلَمَاءُ فُسَّاقٌ. And then he also said, لا تتعلموا العلم لتباهوا به العلماء ولتماروا به السفهاء ولتصرفوا وجوه الناس إليكم فمن فعل ذلك فهو في النار. Don't be, Ibn Majah relates a hadith that said, the Prophet ﷺ said, do not learn knowledge in order to vie with the scholars, or to argue with idiots, or to turn people towards you. Turn the attention of people towards you. Whoever does that is in the hell. And the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever hides knowledge, then Allah will give him a bridle of fire. And the Prophet ﷺ also is reported to have said, Imam Ahmad relates it in the Musnad, لأنا من غير الدجال أخف عليكم من الدجال فقيل وما ذاك فقال من الأئمة المضلين. The Prophet ﷺ said, it's not so much the Dajjal, but even more fearful I have for you than the Antichrist. They said, what is that? he said, leaders who misguide you. And the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said, "Man izdada ilma wa lam yazdad huda, fa lam yazdad min Allah illa bu'da." Imam al-Daylami relates that. He said that whoever increases in knowledge but does not increase in guidance has only increased in distance from God. Isa alayhi salam said, إِلَى مَا تَتَصِفُونَ الطَّرِيقِ لِلْمُدْرِجِينَ وَأَنْتُمْ مُقِيمُونَ مَعَ الْمُتَحَيِّرِينَ. How long will you describe this path for night travelers, and yet you sit and don't take it amongst those who are just residents, lost residents. فَهَذَا وَغَيْرُهُ مِنَ الْأَخْبَارِ. All of these things indicate the danger of knowledge. As for the athar, Umar radiallahu anhu said, إِنَّ أَخْوَفَ مَا أَخَافُ عَلَى هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ الْمُنَافِقَ الْعَلِيمِ. The thing I fear most for this ummah is a hypocrite who has knowledge. قَالُوا وَكِيفَ يَكُونُ مُنَافِقًا عَلِيمًا. I mean, the Sahaba couldn't even imagine that, because the munafiqun amongst them were not scholars. They said, how could a munafiq have knowledge? قَالَ عَلِيمَ اللِّسَانِ جَهَلَ الْقَلْبُ وَالْعَمَلِ. He'll have knowledge of the tongue, but his heart is empty, ignorant, and his actions are bereft. Hassan said, don't be those who acquire the knowledge of the ulama and the subtleties of the wise, and then their actions are like fools. A man said to Abu Huraira, I want to learn knowledge. وَأَخَافُ أَنْ أُضَيِّعُهُ فَقَالَ كَفَى بِتَرْكِكَ الْعِلْمِ إِضَاعَةً لَهُ. I want to learn knowledge, but I'm afraid that I'll abuse it or lose it. And he said, it's enough that you leave it, that you've lost it. In other words, don't use that as an excuse for not seeking knowledge. Ibrahim ibn Uyayna said, which people have the greatest loss or sadness? And he said, as for those in this world, he said, the one who does a good thing for somebody who has no gratitude. You know, you just regret doing something when somebody just shows no gratitude. And he says, but as for after death, it's a scholar who was derelict, like negligent in his knowledge. Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad said, people are four, and I mentioned that, the four types, if you remember, the one who knows and knows he knows, he's a scholar, learn from him, etc. You can go back and look at that. Sufyan al-Thawri said, يهتف العلم بالعمل فإن أجابه وإلا ارتحل. Knowledge calls to action. If you answer it, it stays with you. If you don't, it goes and calls somebody else. Ibn al-Mubarak said, a man is considered a scholar as long as he seeks knowledge, and at the point where he thinks he knows, he's ignorant. Fudayl ibn Iyad said, إني لا أرحم ثلاثة عزيز قوم ذل وغني افتقر وعالما تلعب به الدنيا. I feel compassion towards three people. Somebody who was in a distinguished position, and then he falls from grace, either scandalized, something happens. You feel sorry for them. It's very difficult, because you can't restore yourself after that. And then a rich man who becomes impoverished, and a scholar who the world plays with him. In another riwayah, it's imra'atun tulliqat, a woman who is divorced. Difficult also. Uqubat al-ulama mawt al-qalb. Imam al-Hasan said the punishment of scholars is the death of the heart. And the death of the heart is to seek dunya with the actions of Achara. To seek this world with the actions of the next world. And then he quotes some lines of poetry about how strange it is to sell guidance for error. So you sell guidance to buy error. And he said, but even more stranger is to buy this world with the Deen. And even stranger than that is to buy somebody else's dunya with your Deen. Imam Malik was once asked, who are the lowest people? And he said, those who seek this world with knowledge, with religion, And he said, is there anybody lower than that? He said, people that lose their religion because of other people's worldly affairs. Like people that are obsessed with wealthy people and want to be like them. And they don't get it, but that deters them from setting out on a path, right? Lifestyles of the rich and famous, right? They should really call that lifestyles of the sick and infamous. So then he says, Isa alayhi salam said, the likeness of a bad scholar, the bad scholars, is like a stone that sits in the middle of a river. It neither drinks from it, nor does it let anybody drink from that. Right? Or it's like a sewage pipe. Outwardly, it's plaster, but inwardly it's foul. And then he says, as for وَأَنَّ الْفَائِزِينَ الْمُقَرَّبِينَ هُمْ عُلَمَاء الْآخِرَةِ. So there's ulama ad-dunya, he talks about them. But then he's going to show you what are the signs. And he says there's 12 signs. The first one, أَلَّا يَطُلُبَ الدُّنْيَا بِعِلْمِهِ, that he doesn't seek this world with his knowledge. And then he says, من لا يعلم مضادة الدنيا للآخرة وأن الجمع بينهما طمع في غير مطمع فهو جاهر بشرائع الأنبياء كلهم. So anyone that doesn't know that this world is against the next world and that trying to get both of them is seeking something that in the wrong place, he's ignorant of the ways of the prophets. And he's also a disbeliever in the Quran. From its beginning to its end, because it's warning us about this world. And he said, so how can you consider that person amongst the scholars? And he mentions that إنما يذهب بهاء العلم أو يذهب إنما يذهب بهاء العلم والحكمة إذا طلب بهما الدنيا. That the beauty of knowledge and wisdom, it goes, it leaves the person when it's used to be, for dunya to be sought after. Sa'id ibn Musayyib said, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْعَالَمْ يَغْشِ الْأُمَرَاءِ فَهُوَ لِص. If you see a scholar going all the time to the rulers, know that he's a thief. Just going there for the wrong reasons. وَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْعَالِمْ مُحِبًّا لِلدُّنْيَا فَاتَّهِمُوهُ عَلَى دِينِكُمْ إِنَّ كُلَّ مُحِبٍّ يَخُوضُ فِيمَا أَحَبَّ. If you see, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu said, if you see a scholar loving this world, then be suspect about his religion. Because a lover is obsessed with what he loves. Malik ibn Dinar said, I read in one of the earlier books that the least of what I do to a scholar who loves this world is I take from his heart the sweetness of intimacy with me. Yahya ibn Mu'adh al-Razi said about the ulama of dunya, this is amazing. Ya ashab al-ilm, qusurukum qaysariyya, wa buyutukum kisrawiyya, wa athwabukum tahiriyya, wa akhfafukum jalutiyya, ومراكبهم قارونية وأوانيكم فرعونية ومآتمكم جاهلية ومذاهبكم شيطانية فأين الشريعة المحمدية? He said, oh, you ulama of this world, scholars of this world, oh, you who claim knowledge, your palaces are Caesar's palaces. Your homes are the homes of Kisra. Your clothes are the clothes of... Tahiriyya is somebody, Abdullah bin Tahir, was famous for extravagant clothes, like Beau Brummel in the Western tradition. So he says your clothes are, like Liberace. Your shoes are Goliath's shoes, Jalut. Your vehicles are Qaruniya, Qarun. Your utensils are Pharaonic. And your gatherings are the gatherings of Jahiliyyah. And your schools are the schools of Shaitan. So where are you from the Sharia al-Muhammadiyah? Bishr ibn al-Harith buried 12, somewhere around, over 10 books. He buried them. And he used to say, I want to relate the hadith, and if this desire would go from me to relate it, I would relate it. In other words, the desire to do it, he didn't want to answer that. And one of them said, if you desire to speak, don't speak. And if you don't desire to speak, then speak. In other words, do the opposite of your nafs. And that's why Imam Ghazali said, if you're in a gathering and somebody asks a question, he said, first check your heart and see, is it fine for somebody else to answer it? If there's somebody else there that can answer it, let them answer it. If there's nobody else there that can answer it, you should wish there was. Then you can answer it. But to jump into it, that was a sign for them of sickness. Sahaba fled from answering questions. They would say, go ask so-and-so. Sahal said, العلم كله الدنيا والآخرة منه العمر بي والعمر كله هباء إلا الإخلاص. Sahal al-Tusturi, he was great Zahid in Baghdad. He said, knowledge, all of it is worldly by its nature. The akhirah, the other worldly aspect of it, is acting according to it. And that action, all of it, is dust particles, except sincerity. And he also said, people are all dead except for the learned. And the learned are drunk except for those who act according to their knowledge. And those who act according to it are deluded, except the sincere ones. And the sincere ones are in a dangerous situation. حَتَّى يُخْتَمَ لَهُ بِهِ, until the death comes. Sulaiman al-Darani said, if a man seeks hadith, أو تزوج أو سافر في طلب المعاش فقد ركن إلى الدنيا. If a man seeks hadith or marries, usually they say the second time. The first time is not considered dunya, but the second time it's from the dunya. Unless there was a reason to do it that was done out of taking care of somebody or helping somebody with a good intention. But generally they considered it to be of the dunya. وإنما أراد به طلب الأسانيد العالية. He means looking for high sanad, things that the muhaddithun do. Isa alayhi salam said, how can you be from the people of knowledge? How can someone be amongst the people of knowledge when he's headed towards the akhirah, and yet he's headed towards the afterlife, and yet he's looking for dunya? And how can he be from the people of knowledge when he seeks words in order to speak them and not to act according to them? And Salih bin Hassan al-Basri said, I met many shuyukh, أدركت الشيوخ وهم يتعوذون بالله من الفاجر العالم بالسنة. And they sought refuge from scholars that didn't act according to the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ said from Abu Hurairah, Abu Dawud and Ibn Majah related, that whoever seeks knowledge that should be sought solely for the sake of God, in order to acquire some portion of this world, he will not smell the scent of paradise on the Day of Judgment. العلماء يحشرون في زمرة الأنبياء والقضاة يحشرون في زمرة السلاطين. True scholars will be raised up with the prophets, but the judges and people that learn to get worldly positions will be raised up with the rulers. La ilaha illallah. Mu'adh ibn Jabal said that, some consider it mawquf, which means it's from Mu'adh. Others consider it marfu', means it's elevated to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "Min fitnat al-alim an yakuna al-kalamu ahabba ilayhi min al-istima'." From the trials or tribulations of a scholar is that speaking is preferred to him over listening. وَفِي الْكَلَامِ تَنْمِيقٌ وَزِيَادَةٌ. And he ornaments his words and speaks excessively. وَلَا يُؤْمَنُ عَلَى صَاحِبِهِ الْخَطَأ. And he doesn't فِي الصَّمْتِ سَلَامَةٌ وَعِلْمٌ. And the one that does this is not safe from making mistakes. In silence is safety and knowledge. وَمِنَ الْعُلَمَاء مَنْ يَحْزُنُ عِلْمَهُ فَلَا يُحِبُّ أَنْ يُوجَدَ عِنْدَ غَيْرِهِ يَخْزُنُ. Amongst the ulama are those who hide their sources and where they get their knowledge from. They don't want people to see it, right? They don't want to tell them the books they read. They don't want to share the books. And this is like, some people have recipes they won't share with anybody. You go to their house and you have an amazing meal, and somebody says, "Oh, that was so, can I have that recipe?" On your life. You're not getting that recipe. I got that from my grandmother, and she got it from her grandmother. It's been a family secret for centuries. And, okay? It's very strange. People want it. This is ihtikar, the whole idea of keeping things. Every thought that you have that's worth anything was inspired. It's not from you. So it's not your property. There's no such thing as intellectual property. Jonas Salk, you know who he was? Jonas Salk, anybody? Polio, yeah, good for you. People should know these people because he saved a lot of lives. Jonas Salk, he wouldn't patent. He could have patented and made it millions, right? When they asked him why he didn't patent the vaccine, he said, "Do you patent the rays of the sun?" That's not a Muslim. So this idea of فَذَلِكَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَوَّلِ مِنَ النَّارِ. That attitude is in the lowest part of hell. وَمِنَ الْعُلَمَاءِ مَنْ يَكُونُ فِي عِلْمِهِ بِمَنْزِلَةِ السُّلْطَانِ. And there's those who, with their knowledge, they're like a ruler. فَإِنْ رُدَّ عَلَيْهِ شَيْءٌ مِنْ عِلْمِهِ. If anybody disagrees with them, تُهُوِنَ بِشَيْءٍ مِنْ حَقِّهِ. He humiliates them or belittles them. وَغَضِبَ. And he gets upset. And he said that's in the second degree of the fire. ومن العلماء من يجعل علمه وغائب حديثه لأهل الشرف واليسار ولا يرى أهل الحاجة له أهلا. And there's some who their knowledge is just for the people of wealth and honorable people, and people in need, he doesn't see them as worthy. فذلك في الدرك الثالث. He's in the third degree of the fire. ومن العلماء من ينصب نفسه للفتيا فيفتي بالخطأ. And there are those who put themselves up to give fatwa, and they give fatwa, and they're not capable, so they make mistakes. And wallahu ta'ala yubghid al-mutakallifin. And Allah, He loathes the people that take on more than their people of takalluf. They're going over and above what they should. فذلك في الدرك الرابع. Those are in the fourth degree in the fire. ومن العلماء من يتكلم بكلام اليهود والنصارى ليغزر به علمه. And there's those who will quote the Jews and the Christians in order to make the knowledge appear copious. وذلك في الدرك الخامس. He's in the fifth. ومن العلماء من يتخذ علمه مروءة ونبلة وذكرى في الناس. There are those who take their knowledge as a source of dignity and nobility and to be mentioned amongst the people. They're in the sixth degree. ومن العلماء من يستفزه الزهو والعجب فإن وعظ عنف وإن وعظ أنف فذلك في الدرك السابع. And then there are those who get amazed at themselves. When they start to exhort, they get very harsh with people. And then when they're exhorted, they get arrogant. And they're in the 7th. فَعَلَيْكَ بِالصَّمْتِ, he says. وَبِهِ تَغْرِبُ الشَّيْطَانِ. So just shut up. And you will conquer shaitan that way. وَإِيَّاكَ أَن تَضَحَكَ فِي غَيْرِ عَجَبٍ. Don't laugh without cause. People that are always laughing for no reason. وَلَا تَمْشِي فِي غَيْرِ أَرَبٍ. And don't go anywhere without some purpose. Just sauntering about the mall to kill time. It's an interesting expression, kill time. Because time kills us. We don't kill time. Majazan. Allah is the one that does that. But time, majazan. إن العبد لا ينشر له من الثناء ما بين المشرق والمغرب وما يزن عند الله جناح بعوضة. There's people that are praised from the east and the west, and they don't have a mosquito, a gnat's wing of weight with God. All these people that get, Menachem Begin, didn't he get the Nobel Prize? Amazing. People, like he was an airgun terrorist. He was in a terrorist organization. He blew up King David Hotel, killed all these British citizens. It's amazing. And they give him a peace prize. He used to be on Wanted. His picture was on Wanted when the other criminal, the British criminals, were there in Palestine. Well, what are they doing there? Why are people on? It's a problem. What are they doing there? What are we doing in America? That's another thing, Like Native Americans ask that. It's a little hard to point fingers when you live in America. And Muslims were willing to share. People came. They actually helped them, right? When they first came, they helped them survive because they couldn't survive there. They didn't know how to live. They helped them. They celebrated and then after they helped them, they got strong. They wiped them out, right? So, but people are honored in this world that deserve no honor, right? That guy Madoff, remember him, Madoff? He had all these awards, philanthropy awards. It's amazing. His house was filled with awards. He was on the board of he taught business ethics, I think, at the Jewish university there. What a world, like the Wicked Witch said. And then he said, don't sit. The Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said, لا تجلسوا عند كل عالم إلا عالم يدعوكم من خمس إلى خمس. Don't sit with every learned person. Just sit with a learned person who invites you to abandon 5 things for the adoption of 5 things. He calls you from doubt to certainty, من الشك إلى اليقين, ومن الرياء إلى الإخلاص, and from outward eye service to sincerity, ومن الرغبة إلى الزهد, and from desire to detachment, ومن الكبر إلى التواضع, and from arrogance to humility, ومن العداوة إلى النصيحة, and from antipathy, animosity to sincere desire for the good of others. So you go from hating people to actually wanting good for them, even your enemies. The Prophet ﷺ wanted good even for his enemies. All right, so there's 5. They should call you from away from 5 to 5. From doubt to certainty. From riyah to sincerity. Riyah is to do things in order for people to see you. It's like eye service, ostentatious behavior. And then from desire of this world to detachment of this world. من الرغبة إلى الزهد. ومن الكبر إلى التواضع, and from arrogance to humility. ومن العداوة إلى النصيحة, and from animosity or antipathy towards others to sincere desire for their well-being. And that's related by Abu Nu'aym. And Abu Talib وقفه, he considered it موقوف عن جابر. So some say it's موقوف, some say it's موقوف means that the Sahabi relates it from himself. Marfu' is that the Prophet ﷺ said it. موقوف مع حكم المرفوع is where the Sahabi doesn't say that it's from the Prophet, but it has the category of being from the Prophet because it's about something that the Sahabi couldn't have known without the Prophet, like something about the end of time. وقال الله تعالى فخرج على قومه في زينته وقال الذين يريدون الحياة الدنيا يا ليت لنا مثل ما أوتي قارون إنه لذو حظ عظيم. So when Qarun went out with all his ornaments and the people saw him, they were amazed by it. قال الذين أوتوا العلم ويلكم ثواب الله خير لمن آمن. Woe unto you, the reward of God is better than whatever Qarun has in this dunya. So he's saying these are the true ulama that know that the next world is better than this world. So that's a sign. وَمِنْهَا, and another sign, أَلَّا يُخَالِفْ فِعْلُهُ قَوْلُهُ, his actions do not belie his words. بَلْ لَا يَأْمُرُ بِالشَّيْءٍ مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ هُوَ أَوَّلَ عَمْلٍ بِهِ. He doesn't tell people to do something except he's the first one that does it. أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do you call people to righteousness and yet you forget yourselves? كَبُرَ مَقْتًا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. It's an odious thing to God that you should say what you don't do. And then Shu'aib, the Prophet Shu'aib said, وَمَا أُرِيدُ أَنْ أُخَالِفَكُمْ إِلَى مَا أَنْهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ. I don't want to go against what I'm telling you not to do. So Shu'aib is saying, the thing I'm telling you not to do, I'm not going to do it. And then Allah says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهِ. Have taqwa of Allah and God will teach you. Even though this is not a jumla shartiyya in Arabic, if it was a jumla shartiyya, it would say, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهِ. Have taqwa and God will teach you as a result of your taqwa. The classical tafsir is, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهِ means have taqwa and God will teach you what you need to have taqwa. But the ulama have all accepted the meaning also, that it means if you have taqwa, you will have. And there's a hadith, man amila bima alima warathuhu Allahu ilma ma lam ya'lam. Whoever acts according to what he knows, God will teach him what he doesn't know. So that's the meaning of that. Wattaqullah wa'alamu. Have taqwa and know. Wattaqullah wasma'u. Have taqwa and listen. Isa alayhi salam said, Ya bin Maryam. It was said to Isa, Allah said to Isa, Ya bin Maryam, عِظْ نَفْسِكَ فِإِنَّ اتَّعَظْتَ فَعِظَ النَّاسِ وَإِلَّا فَاسْتَحِي مِنِّي. Imam Ahmad relates in the book of Zuhud that Isa said, that Allah said to Isa, Oh Jesus, exhort your own soul, and if it follows your exhortation, if it's in line with that, then exhort others. And if not, then be ashamed of me. Have shame before me. Be ashamed to tell people to do something that you're not doing. قال رسول الله مررت ليلة أسري بي بأقوام تقرض شفاههم بمقاريض من النار فقلت من أنتم فقالوا إن كنا نأمر بالخير ولا نأتي وننهى عن الشر ونأتي. I saw people on the Isra and they were having their lips cut off with scissors from fire. And I said, who are these people? And they said, we used to tell people to do good and we didn't do it, and we told them not to do evil and we did it. And think of how many, all of these preachers out there telling people to do these things, and then they get money. There's so many of these televangelists that do this. And we have our own problems in our own community as well, but you certainly see that a lot in where we live, many of us. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم هلاك أمتي عالم فاجر وعبد جاهل. My ummah is destroyed because of profligate scholars or learned people and ignorant worshippers. وشر الشرار, and the worst of the worst, شرار العلماء, are the bad ulama. وخير الخيار خيار العلماء, and the best of the best are the best of the scholars. قال الأوزاعي شكت النواويس ما تجد من نتن جيف الكفار فأوحى الله إليها بطون علماء السوء أنتن مما أنتم فيه. The graves, Al-Awza'i says that the graves complained about the foulness of the bodies of the kuffar. And so Allah revealed to them the insides of bad scholars is more foul than the dead carcasses rotting in your graves. Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad said, بلغني أن الفسقة من العلماء يبدأ بهم يوم القيامة قبل عبدة الأوثان. It has reached me that the bad scholars, Allah begins with them before He begins with the idolaters in punishment. Abu Darda said, وَيْلٌ لِمَنْ لَا يَعْلَمُ مَرَّةً وَيْلٌ لِمَنْ يَعْلَمُ وَلَا يَعْمَلُ سَبْعَ مَرَّاتٍ. Woe to those who don't know, the ignorant. But woe to those who know and don't act 7 times. And there are people from the paradise who see people from the fire, and they say to them, what got you into the fire? You are the ones that saved us from the fire and got us into paradise because of your teaching. And they said, we used to tell people to do good and we didn't do it. It's related by Ibn al-Mubarak in Zuhud. Hatim al-Asam, he said the people that have the biggest remorse on the Day of Judgment are the scholars who taught people things that got them into paradise, and yet they didn't act according to it, and so they were perished. Ibrahim ibn Adham passed by a rock once. Ibrahim ibn Adham was a great Central Asian. He was a prince that gave up the dunya. His story is actually very similar to the story that the Buddhists have about Buddha. But he passed by a rock, and it was written on the rock, turn me over and learn something. So he said, I turned the rock over, and I found written under it, أنت بما تعلم لا تعمل فكيف تطلب علم ما لم تعلم. With what you know, you're not acting. So why are you seeking knowledge of what you don't know? Ibn Simak, rahimahullah, kam min mudhakkirin billah nasin lillah. How many people reminding people of God and they've forgotten God? Kam min mukhawwifin billah jari'un ala Allah. And how many frightening people about God and yet they have no shame? Kam min muqarrabin ila Allah ba'idun min Allah. And how many people getting others near to God and yet they're far from God? وَكَمْ مِنْ دَاعٍ إِلَى اللَّهِ فَارٌ مِنَ اللَّهِ. And how many calling to God are fleeing from God? وَكَمْ مِنْ تَالٍ لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ مُنْسَرِخٌ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ. And how many people reciting the book of Allah and yet they're so far from those ayahs they're reciting? قال إبراهيم ابن أدهم لقد أعربنا في كلامنا فلم نلحن ولحن في أعمالنا فلم نعرب. We speak so eloquently with our words and don't make mistakes, and yet with our actions we make mistakes and don't act correctly. Awza'i said, إذا جاء الإعراب ذهب الخشوع. When you hear grammatically correct Arabic, there goes the khushu'. He's saying something about the ulama. You know, the ulama. You know, part of the problem is when it's like Abu Bakr, when the Yemenis came and the Prophet started reciting Quran, they all started weeping. And Abu Bakr looked at some of the Sahaba and he said, do you remember when we were like that? You know, the first time we heard these things. And one of the things about scholars is because they spend a lot of time in these books and with this knowledge, the effect can diminish if they're not watching their hearts. And so that's what he's saying, is that you can learn all these fine things, but where's the khushu'? It's like the, you know, this is a Sufi story, but the meaning's nice. About the grammarian, he was sitting with the man, he's waiting for the boat to take him across, and he's sitting, and he hears a man reciting Fatiha, and he makes all these mistakes. And he's like, Astaghfirullah, haven't you ever learned anything? He said, no, nobody was here to help me, teach me. And so he told them how to recite it. And he said, you should be ashamed of yourself at your age. You don't even know Fatiha. And he was very sad. He felt bad. And then he gets on the boat. And so he's halfway across the river. And then the man comes running across the water, like walking on the water. He said, could you just tell me that third line? Just a story. مثل الذي يتعلم العلم ولا يعمل به كمثل امرأة زنت في السر فحملت فظهر حملها فافتضحت فكذلك من لا يعلم بعلمه فيفضحه الله تبارك وتعالى يوم القيامة. He said that the likeness of one who learns knowledge and doesn't act according to it is like a woman who does zina in private, but then she becomes pregnant. And then everybody knows. And that's like the one who doesn't act according to his knowledge. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, it'll all come out. Mu'az said, احذروا زلة العالم لأن قدره عند الخلق عظيم فيتبعونه على زلته. Beware of the slip of the scholar because he has stature and people will follow him. Omar said, إذا زل العالم زل بزلته عالم. If the scholar slips, the world slips with him. Hudayfa radiallahu anhu said, إنكم في زمان من ترك في عشر ما يعلم هلك. If you leave just 1/10 of what you've been given, you will perish. But a time is coming, if they act according to 1/10, they'll be saved. And that's because there are so many battalin. There's people that aren't doing anything. They're not acting. They're just inactive, idle people. And he said, you should know, Imam Ghazali saying, you should know that a scholar is like a qadi, and there's three. The qadi who acts according to the truth, and he knows what he's doing, and that's in paradise. And then the qadi, the judge, who acts oppressively, and he knows, or he doesn't know, and he's in the fire. And then the qadi who قضى بغير ما أمر الله به فهو بالنار. And then the qadi who goes against what Allah has said, and he's in the fire. So 2 qadis in the fire, and 1 in paradise. And he's saying the scholars are the same. And then Ka'b said, يكون في آخر الزمان علماء يزاهدون الناس في الدنيا ولا يزهدون. There's going to be scholars who are telling people be detached from the world, and yet they're not detached. يخوفون الناس ولا يخافون. They make people fear, and yet they don't fear. وينهون عن غشيان الولاة ويأتونهم. And they talk about the oppression of the tyrants, but then they go to them. ويؤثرون الدنيا على الآخرة. They prefer this world to the next. ويأكلون بألسنتهم. They acquire their livelihood with their tongues. وَيُقَرِّبُونَ الْأَغْنِيَاءَ دُونَ الْفُقَرَاء. Their friends are rich and they avoid the poor. وَيَتَغَايَرُونَ عَلَى الْعِلْمِ كَمَا تَتَغَايَرُ النِّسَاءُ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ. And they have the jealousy about their knowledge like women have jealousy over men. وَيَغْضَبُ أَحَدُهُمْ عَلَى جَلِيسِهِ إِذَا جَالَسَ غَيْرَهُ. And he gets angry if one of the students goes and sits with somebody else. أُولَئِكَ الْجَبَّارُونَ أَعْدَاءُ الرَّحْمَنِ. These are tyrants, enemies of the Rahman. And it's been related, Shaitan got to knowledge before you. And they said, how would that be for us? And he said that you seek knowledge, but you don't act according to it. And then he said, and then he keeps speaking about knowledge, but he's putting off action until he dies. So it's like shaitan. Malik radiallahu anhu said, seeking knowledge is a good thing. Spreading knowledge is a good thing if the niyyah is sound, if your intention is good. But look what you're doing from the time you get up in the morning until the time you get up at night. go to sleep at night. So you should not prefer other things over to that, to knowledge, like worldly things and things. Ibn Mas'ud said the Quran was revealed in order to act according to it. فَاتَّخَذْتُمْ دِرَاسَتُهُ عَمَلًا. So you studied it in order to act. وَسَيَأْتِي قَوْمٌ يَثْقَفُونَهُ مِثْلَ الْقَنَاةِ لَيْسُوا بِخِيَارِكُمْ أو يثقفونه. I think يثقفونه مثل القناة. لَيْسُوا بِخِيَارِكُمْ. They'll pierce it like a spear. Or it could be straightening it out. But I think they'll pierce it like a spear. In other words, they'll really know the book well. لَيْسُوا بِخِيَارِكُمْ. They're not the best of you. وَالْعَالِمُ الَّذِي لَا يَعْلَمُ كَالْمَرِيضِ. The one who doesn't act is like a sick person that is telling people what remedy. Or a hungry person who's talking about how wonderful food is and then they don't have any. And then the third is that أن تكون عنايته بتحصيل العلم النافع في الآخرة. That his most important concern is getting beneficial knowledge for the next life. And a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, teach me some strange things. Teach me غرائب العلم. And the Prophet said, ما صنعت في رأس العلم. What have you learned about the essence of this matter? And so, فقال وَمَا رَأْسُ الْعِلْمِ. What is that? What's the capital of this thing? What's the head of this? فَقَالَ صلى الله عليه وسلم هَلْ عَرَفْتَ الرَّبِّ. Do you know your Lord? قَالَ نَعَمْ. He said, yes. قَالَ فَمَا صَنَعْتَ فِي حَقِّهِ. Then what did you do in what's due to your Lord? قَالَ مَا شاء الله. I did what Allah has willed. فَقَالَ صلى الله عليه وسلم هَلْ عَرَفْتَ الْمَوْتِ. Do you know death? قَالَ نَعَمْ. I do. قَالَ فَمَا عَدَدْتَ لَهُ. What have you prepared for it? قَالَ مَا شاء الله. What Allah has willed. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم اذهب فأحكم ما هنالك ثم تعال نعلمك من غرائب العلم. Go and practice that. And once you've done that, once you've really mastered that, come back and I'll teach you غرائب. Abu Nu'aym relates that in Ibn Abd al-Barr. This is, I think, if you get this is the lub of this book in some ways. Hatim al-Asam, he was a beautiful man. He was a scholar, but he was known for his zuhud. And he was a student of Shaqiq al-Balkhi from Balkh, which is in Afghanistan. And one day Shaqiq said to him, how long have you been with me? Hatim said, I've been with you 33 years. This was the tradition. People stayed with their teachers for years. I've been with you 33 years. One man, Imam al-Bukhari had a student who was with him 20 years. Imam al-Bukhari used to practice archery every morning. There's a hadith, whoever learns a martial art and then abandons it has disobeyed me. Like either don't learn it, but if you learn it, you have to maintain the practice. Because martial arts is a practice. So the warning is, if you're going to learn something like that, you better practice it. So he said that he was with Imam al-Bukhari 20 years. He used to go out every morning and do target practice. He said, I never saw him miss the bullseye once. Imam al-Bukhari. Amazing. That's such an indication of who he was. So anyway, Hatim, he said, I've been with you 33 years. He said, what have you learned from me in all this time? He said, 8 things. Shaqiq said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It's like a musibah. From God we belong, to Him we return. ذهب عمري معك ولم تتعلم إلا 8 مسائل. My life has dissipated in your company and you only learn from me 8 things. قال يا أستاذ لم أتعلم غيرها. My teacher, it's all I learned. And so he said, إني لا أحب أن أكذب. I don't want to lie to you. فقال هاتي هذه 8. Let's hear them. حتى أسمعها. Hatim said, أما الأولى نظرت إلى هذا الخلق فرأيت كل واحد يحب محبوبا فهو مع محبوبه إلى القبر فإذا وصل إلى القبر فارقه فجعلت الحسنات محبوبي فإذا دخلت القبر دخل محبوبي معي. I noticed that everyone loves somebody in this world. And that love, they will take it to their grave. But once they get to their grave, that lover can't go with them. And so I took good deeds as my beloved, because I knew they would go into the grave with me. قال أحسنت. It's good, Hatim. What's the second? قال نظرت في قول الله عز وجل وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى. I found that Allah said, and as for those who have awe of the station of their Lord, and they prevent their egos or their nafs from their passions and desires, paradise will be their final abode. فعلمت أن قوله سبحانه وتعالى هو الحق. And I realized that Allah's word is true. فأجهدت نفسي في دفع الهوى. So I have fought my soul in warding off its desires حتى استقرت على طاعة الله, until it became fixed in the abode of obedience. The third, إني نظرت إلى هذا الخلق. I looked at this creation فرأيت كل من معه شيء له قيمة ومقدار عنده رفعه وحفظه. ثم نظرت في قوله عز وجل ما عندكم ينفد وما عند الله باق. فكلما وقع معي شيء له قيمة ومقدار وجهته إلى الله ليبقى لي عنده محفوظا. I noticed that people, whenever they value something, they guard it and protect it. And then I looked at what Allah said when He said, those things that are with me remain. Those things that مَا عِنْدُكُمْ يَنْفَدْ, those things that you have, they dissipate. They go to naught. But what is with God remains. And so anything that had value for me, I directed it to God in order for it to stay with Him protected. The fourth, إني نظرت إلى هذا الخلق. I looked at this creation فرأيت كل واحد منهم يرجع إلى المال والحسب والشرف والنسب فنظرت فيها فإذا هي لا شيء. ثم نظرت إلى قول الله عز وجل إن أكرمكم عند الله يتقاكم. I looked فعملت في التقوى حتى أكون عند الله كريما. I looked at this creation and I saw all of them. What they hold in esteem is wealth, their lineage, their honor, and all these things. Yeah, I looked at them and I found they were nothing. And then I contemplated God's word. The noblest of you with God are the most pious or conscientious. And so I directed my actions towards piety so that I would be noble with God. The fifth, I looked at this creation, all of them attacking one another, cursing one another. And all of this I found was rooted in envy. And then I looked at Allah's word, نَحْنُ قَسَمْنَا بَيْنُهُمْ مَعِيشَتُهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. We have apportioned the lots in this world. God, we have apportioned the lots in this world. And so I left hasad, I left envy, وَاشْتَنَبْتُ الْخَلْقِ, and I avoided these things in creation. وَعَلِمْتُ أَنَّ الْقِسْمَ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ, and I knew that allotments and apportions are from God. فَتَرَكْتُ عَدَاوَةَ الْخَلْقِ عَنِّي. I stopped hating and fighting with people. The sixth, نظرت إلى هذا الخلق, how some of them are oppressing others, some of them are fighting others. And I looked at Allah's word, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌّ فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًّا. The devil is your enemy, so take him as an enemy. فَعَادَيْتُهُ وَحْتَهُ وَاجْتَهَدْتُ فِي أَخْذِ حِذْرِي مِنْهُ لأن الله تعالى شهد عليه أنه عدو لي فَتَرَكْتُ عَدَاوَةَ الْخَلْقِ غَيْرَهُ. I looked at this creation all fighting each other, killing each other, and then I looked at Allah's words, the devil is your enemy, so take him as an enemy. So I took him alone as my enemy. And I exhausted my energies in guarding myself against him. Because Allah said that he was my enemy. وَتَرَكْتُ عَدَاوَةَ الْخَلْقِ. And I left fighting people. The seventh, I looked at this creation. فرأيت كل واحد منهم يطلب هذه الكسرة فيذل نفسه فيها ويدخل فيما لا يحل له. ثم نظرت إلى قوله تعالى وما من دابة في الأرض إلا وعلى الله رزقها، فعلمت أني واحد من هذه الدواب التي على الله رزقها، فاشتغلت بمال الله تعالى علي وتركت مالي عنده. I saw all of creation going after these crumbs of bread, meaning livelihood, their livelihood, kisra. And that they would humiliate themselves in pursuit of it. And they would even go to the point where they would enter into the haram. And then I looked at Allah's word. There's not a creature in the earth except God has guaranteed its provision. And so I knew that I was one of His creatures. And Allah has already guaranteed my provision. So I occupied myself with what is for God. And I left what is for that He has taken care of. I left that to Him. The last, نظرت إلى هذا الخلق فرأيتهم كلهم متوكلين على مخلوق، هذا على ضيعته وهذا على تجارته وهذا على صناعته وهذا على صحة بدنه، وكل مخلوق متوكل على مخلوق مثله. فرجعت إلى قوله تعالى ومن يتوكل على الله فهو حسبه فتوكلت على الله عز وجل. I looked at creation and I saw how they were all depending on created things. This one was depending on his farm, this one on his commerce, this one on his craft, this one on the health of his body. And every created thing was depending on another created thing just like him. And I looked at Allah's word, and whoever depends upon God alone, God is enough for him. And so I depended on God, and He has sufficed me. قال الشقيق, his teacher, يا حاتم وفقك الله. Allah has given you tawfiq, or may Allah give you tawfiq. I've looked in the Torah, the Injil, the Zabur, and the Quran al-Azim, and I found all of the good in these books and in religion. They revolve around these 8 things. And those who act according to them. And so whoever acts according to them, he is practicing all 4 books. He said, Imam Ghazali says, look at this. This is what the ulama of the Achara are concerned with. As for the ulama of dunya, they're just worrying about where they're going to get their money, increasing their stature. They forget these type of knowledges that the prophets came to teach us. Dhahak ibn Muzahim, one of the early tabi'in, he said, the people I learned from, what they were learning from each other was piety. Today I see people learning words. And then the 4th one, that he shouldn't be extravagant in his food, his drink, in his clothes, and these things. And he mentions, that's where he mentions the letter of Imam Malik, radiallahu anhu. And he warns about that. And I read that yesterday, so that should be it. The 5th one, that he should avoid the Salatin, rulers. And he should avoid them as long as he can find an exit strategy. بل ينبغي أن يحترز من مخالطتهم وإن جاءوا إليه فإن الدنيا حلوة خضراء وزمامها بأيدي السلاطين. The dunya is sweet, it looks good, and its reins are in the hands of rulers. And so whoever spends time with them, they'll begin to seek their pleasure and to get their hearts to incline towards them. مَعَ أَنَّهُمْ ظَلَمَ, and yet they're oppressors by the very nature of ruling. And so a true person who has Deen doesn't want that type of company. He doesn't want to be constricted because of what they do. And so he should watch out for that. spending time with them is the key to every evil. And the ulama of the Achara, their way is to beware. The Prophet said, "Man bada jafa," whoever spends time in the desert will become harsh by nature. وَمَنْ اتَّبَعَ الصَّيْدَ غَفَلْ, and those who spend a lot of time hunting will become heedless. وَمَنْ أَتَى السُّلْطَانَ اُفْتُتِنَ, and those who go into the ruler's chambers will have fitna, tribulations. The Prophet ﷺ said, you will have rulers that some things you will know from them that are good and other things are not. فَمَنْ أَنْكَرَ فَقَدْ بَرِيَ. So if you reject what's bad from them, you're free of them. But if you're pleased with them or follow them, then Allah will distance you. They said, shouldn't we fight them, Messenger of Allah? He said, no, as long as they pray. Sufyan said, في جهنم واد لا يسكنوا إلا القراء الزوارون للملوك. In hell is a valley that no one lives in it except the learned who often visited the rulers. Hudayfa said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَمَوَاقِدْ فِتْنٍ, beware of the places of tribulation. They said, what are they? He said, the doors of the rulers. One of them goes into them and he will believe his lie. يُصَدِّقُهُ, he'll say, طَالْ عُمْرَكْ, Allah يُطَّوِّلْ عُمْرَكْ. And he knows that they're telling lies. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم العلماء أمناء الرسل على عباد الله تعالى من لم يخالطوا السلطان. The ulama are trustworthy. They're trustees of the messengers for the servants of God as long as they don't spend time with the rulers. Once they start doing that, they have betrayed the messengers. So beware of them, avoid them. Anas relates that. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شرار العلماء الذين يأتون الأمراء وخيار الأمراء الذين يأتون العلماء. The worst of the scholars are those who come to the rulers, and the worst of the rulers and the best of the rulers are those who visit the scholars. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayy said الأول مقيد بالنية والثاني مطلق. That the first is مقيد بالنية. And Imam Ghazali will mention that later, that there are scholars that go in with a good niyyah, but he said it's still dangerous to do that. So because a scholar is with a ruler, it shouldn't automatically, but generally that's the case. And anyway, they stop teaching once they get into the company of the rulers. So Sahnun said how ugly it is for a scholar that somebody comes to his majlis and he doesn't find him and he asks about him, they say he's with the ruler. And he says, this is a great fitna for scholars. It's also one of the easiest ways for shaitan to get to them, especially when they're eloquent and they have sweet words. Shaitan will tell them, oh, it's good for you to go because you're going to tell them to avoid oppression. You're going to say good things. And he will make them imagine that it's from the religion. And once they get in there, then they get used to it. And then they become mudahin, somebody who cajoles them. And he said, and this is how our religion is destroyed. هذا هلاك الدين. The sixth one, that he shouldn't be quick to go to fatwa. Saying I don't know is half of knowledge. So if you see them quick to going to fatwa, Ibn Mas'ud said, those who are quick to do fatwa and answer every question they're asked, I consider him a madman, Majnoon. And he was one of the greatest scholars of the Sahaba. Ibrahim ibn Adham said, there's nothing more difficult for shaitan than a scholar who speaks with knowledge and he's silent with knowledge. And shaitan says, look at this one. His silence is harder on me than his speech. The abdal, these are some of the special awliya that the Prophet mentioned. There's 40 of them generally. They eat only when they need to, and they speak only when it's necessary. Sayyidina Ali was with Abdullah once, and he passed by a man who was speaking to some people, and he said, look at this one. He's saying, "I'rifuni," look at me. So he's speaking, but he's talking about his lisan al-hal. There's lisan al-maqal, and there's lisan al-hal. So he's talking about lisan al-hal, the reality of what he's saying. Omar said, "Aturidun an taj'aluni jisran ta'buruna alayna ila jahannam." Ibn Omar used to say, do you want to make me a bridge that you go to hell over? About asking questions. Abu Ali al-Riyahi and Ibrahim al-Thawri wa Ibn Adham, he said they used to speak with 2 or 3, but if the circle got any bigger than that, they would leave. The Prophet himself sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Ma adri Uzair nabiyyun am la?" Is Ezra a prophet? There's a difference of opinion amongst the Jews about Ezra. So the Prophet said, I don't know, is Uzair a prophet or not? وَمَا أَدْرِي أَتُبَّعٌ مَلْعُونٌ أَمْ لَا? Is Tub'a cursed or not? وَمَا أَدْرِي ذُو الْقَرْنَيْنِ نَبِيٌّ أَمْ لَا? And I don't know, was Dhul Qarnayn a prophet or not? So he's using this as an example. Abu Dawood relates that, and Hakim and Mustadrak. He's using it as an example that even the Prophet ﷺ said, La adri. Now later, there's a hadith that Allah gave him all the knowledges. But the Prophet himself, there were points where he would say, I don't know, and he would have to wait. He said that, Imam Ghazali said, the quickest to give fatwa are the people that have the least knowledge. And the people that are quickest to tell them to go to somebody else are the people that have the most piety or scrupulousness. He said the Sahaba and the Tabi'in were concerned with 5 things. Qira'at al-Quran, recitation of the Quran. Imarat al-Masajid, building, and this would be schools as well, because the Masajid were madrasas. So schools and places of worship and learning. Wa dhikrillah, and remembering God. Wa amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, and enjoining good and forbidding evil, which also involves jihad. وذلك لما سمعوه من قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم كل كلام ابن آدم عليه إلا لا له إلا ثلاث. And this comes from the Prophet saying, everything is against the son of Adam from his words except 3. Enjoining good, forbidding evil, or remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ibn Husayn or Husayn, إن أحدكم لا يفتي في مسألة لو وردت على عمر ابن الخطاب رضي الله عنه لجمع لها أهل بدر. You answer questions today, one of you answers questions today. If Umar ibn al-Khattab was asked the same question, he would have got all the people of Badr to ask their advice. And then he said, it's said that the scholars are 2. A popular scholar, and these are the muftis, and they're ashab al-asatin. They're the notables. The people know. وَعَالِمُ خَاصَّةً. And then the scholars that are not well known. وَهُوَ الْعَالِمُ بِالتَّوْحِيدِ وَعَمَالَ الْقُلُوبِ. These are those who know Tawheed, the real Tawheed, unity. They see God in His actions in everything. And he said these are the people of the Zawaya al-Munfaridun, the people that are hidden and it was said about Ahmad bin Hanbal, he's like the Dijla, the great river. Everybody drinks from him. But Bishr al-Harith is like a pure well that's covered. Only a few people benefit from him. And it was said, if knowledge increases, then the actions, the speech diminishes. The seventh is that his concern is with ilm al-batin and watching his heart and knowing the path to the Achara and being sincere in his hope with Allah. And this is mujahada and muraqabah. And he mentioned something from one of the books, في بعض الكتب السالفة: يا بني إسرائيل, O بني إسرائيل, لا تقولوا العلم في السماء من ينزل به. Don't say knowledge is in the heaven and somebody's going to bring it down. ولا في تخوم الأرض, and don't say it's in the boundaries of the earth. من يصعد به, who's going to pull it up. ولا من وراء البحار, don't say it's over on the other side of the ocean. من يعبر يأتي به, and the one who crosses it will bring it. العلم مجعول في قلوبكم, knowledge is in your hearts. تأدبوا بين يدي بآداب الروحانيين, so have adab with me, the adab of spiritual people. وتخلقوا لي بأخلاق الصديقين, and have the ethics of the righteous. أظهر العلم في قلوبكم, and I will bring out knowledge from your hearts. حتى يغطيكم ويغمركم, until it covers you and inundates you. And then the eighth is أن يكون شديد العناية بتقوية اليقين. This is a really important section. I'm running out of time, but I want to. He said that you should be very concerned with yaqeen. And then he says yaqeen this is the capital of our religion. And what that means is جالس الموقنين, be with those who have certainty. واسمعوا منهم علم اليقين, and learn from them. وواظبوا على الاقتداء بهم, and be consistent in copying them, in imitating them. And as your yaqeen, your certainty gets greater, كما قوي يقينهم, just as theirs was greater, and a little bit of certainty is better than a lot of action. So, what is this? He says, فَإِنْ قُلْتَ, if you say, what does yaqeen mean? And what does it mean to have strong certainty or weak certainty? We want to understand it. So he says, know that yaqeen is a لفظ مشترك يطلقه فريقان لمعنيين مختلفين. It's a synonym that has more than, it has different meanings for two different groups. The first group are the theologians. وَيُعَبِّرُونَ بِهِ عَنْ عَدَمِ الشَّكِّ. They say what it means is not having doubt. It's the inclination of the soul to believing something. And it has 4 maqams. There are 4 stations of certainty for the theologians. The first, أن يعتدل التصديق والتكذيب. The first is that it's the same belief and disbelief. And that's called doubt. So you don't know, you doubt. I don't know. It's like an agnostic. Belief, disbelief, I don't know. That's a middle, and that's called shak, which is the same as kufr for us. Right? The second is that the soul inclines towards one or the other. But they're both possibilities. But there's a possibility to prefer one over the other. So if you ask the man, is this a good man or a bad man? You say, well, by all outward appearances, he appears to me to be a good man. But I know the hadith that people will increase in their knowledge, they'll increase in their actions until they get between paradise and right, it says فِيمَا يَبْدُو لِلنَّاسِ, in what it appears to people, that they're for the people of paradise. So he doubts it, but he thinks that it's probably
more likely that he's righteous. So that's the second, and that's called dhann in our tradition. The preponderance of evidence is on that side, but it's not, you're not certain about it. أظنه صحيح. I think it's true. Right? The third, أن تميل النفس إلى التصديق بشيء بحيث يغلب عليه ولا يخطر ببال غيره. The third is that you believe something and it doesn't occur to you the opposite. And then he says, لنبت النفس عن قبوله, right? ولو خطر بالبال لنبت النفس عن قبوله. If it occurred to him, his soul would reject it. But that's not true knowledge. And he said, because if somebody with doubts came to him and confused him, he might actually begin to have doubts. And this is what we call i'tiqad. This is i'tiqad. You know, it's not a strong belief. And he says, he said it's a type of certainty, muqariban lil-yaqeen. It approximates certainty. This is called taqleed. It's a belief that's based on taqleed. Most of the Muslims fall into this category, which is why we're in such a dangerous time, because atheism has become so powerful. And a lot of Muslims are very confused. And so it's an easy time for shaitan to harvest souls. And then finally, true knowledge. And this is apodictic knowledge, it's called in logic. It's demonstrative. It's something that you can prove. And this is the fourth. And we call this certainty. And he's talking about theologians now, remember. And so he says, for instance, if you ask somebody, is this world, is this creation, is it qadim, eternal? Was it always here? Or is it muhdath? Did it come into existence? Was it created? So he says, you're not going to know that by sensory. You can't perceive that by your senses. You have to think about that. This needs discursive knowledge. And so he says that if you think about it, then you'll arrive at three possibilities. Because if you say that إن لم يكن في الوجود قديم فالموجودات كلها حادثة. If it's not eternal, then it means everything's created. فإن كانت كلها حادثة فهي حادثة بلا سبب. And if everything came into existence without any reason, that's impossible, because nothing comes from nothing. So he said we find three categories. Everything is either eternal, or it's all created, or some of it's eternal and some of it's created. If all of it's eternal, then we've arrived at what we were looking for. Is the world eternal? إذ ثبت على الجملة قديم. So we determine that it's all eternal. وإن كانت كل حادثة فهو محال. But if it's all hadith without a sabab, then that's impossible. So it has to be then فثبت القسم الثالث أو الأول, which is that it was created but it had a creator, or it was eternal forever. It's one of those two. He's showing you how you think this process through. وكل علم حصل على هذا الوجه. If you're thinking like this and you arrive at a demonstrative proof, this is what they call yaqeen, apodictic proof. This is a demonstrative proof. And it's done discursively through thinking and using the gharizat al-aql, the instinct of the intellect. For instance, you could have a historical fact, or a fact like the existence of Mecca, epistemologically. Even if you've never visited Mecca, you know that Mecca exists, right? Too many people, they could have all conspired and lied. Or you can have a tajriba, an experiment, like the knowledge that certain formulas are laxatives, right? So if you take a senna, every time anybody takes it, it makes their bowels move. So we determine from that This makes the bowels move. That's through tajriba. So these are the ways people know. So anything that doesn't have doubt amongst them is called yaqeen. Now, the yaqeen of the fuqaha and the mutasawwifa and most of the ulama, this is different. Because what they're talking about is the certainty on the heart. Like when you have yaqeen in your prayer, and you're certain you did 3, but you doubt the 4th, you build on yaqeen. Because you have doubt about the 4th rakat. So, tibni ala al-yaqeen. So that's what he's saying. And he said, so however that the heart is overwhelmed by that, we call that certainty. And he said, now that certainty can be strong or weak. So for instance, we're all certain of death, but how is that affecting your heart? إِذَا مَسْتَوْلَ عَلَى قَلْبِكَ, if it's not really taken hold of your heart, you're in ghafla. So even though you know you're going to die, your certainty of it is weak. You're certain of it, but it's not having an effect on your behavior. And he said, that's why some of them said, مَا رَأَيْتُ يَقِينًا لَا شَكَّ فِيهِ أَشْبَهَ بِشَكٍّ لَا يَقِينَ فِيهِ مِنَ الْمَوْتِ. I never saw anything certain without any doubt in it that was like doubt without any certainty in it more than death. Right? So we're certain of it, there's no doubt about it, but it looks more like doubt that we have no certainty of, the way people behave. So you have, and then you have weak and strong. And then you have khafa and jala, what's clear to everybody and then what's not as clear. So he said, for instance, that it's clear about Musa. Everybody knows Musa was a prophet. But it's less clear about Ilyas, even though we're certain about it. So there's some certainties that we all share, and then there's other certainties that people, you have to be aware of it. And then qilla and kathra. So he uses those all as examples. And then, and this is very important, because this is related to certainty. How much? We're out of time, huh? 10 minutes. Allah. So he says about Tawheed, and this is very important for Muslims today. True Tawheed is that you see all things as being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you don't see the wasa'il. You don't see the means that are musakhara, that are subjugated. La hukma laha. They don't really have any ruling. So the musaddaq bihada mu'minun. If you really believe this, that God is doing everything, you're a believer. وَانْتَفَعَ عَنْ قَلْبِهِ مَعَ الْإِيمَانِ إِمْكَانُ الشَّكِّ. And there's not going to be any doubt in your heart. And you're certain of بِأَحَدَ الْمَعْنِيَيْنِ. فإن غرب على قلبه مع الإيمان غربة أزال عنه الغضب على الوسائط. When you have true iman in your heart, it removes this anger about the means. And that doesn't mean that you're not angry about wrongs in the world, but you're angry in a different way, because you recognize it as a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it doesn't have that hatred that takes over the heart. You should get angry and you should have that indignation. But it's an indignation in which you're aware, Allah is testing me with this. It's very different from not seeing that it's Allah that is allowing this to happen as a test. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ. And so you should be content with it in that way and have gratitude. And you should see the means like the pen in the hand. The hand is God's. The means is the pen. So those that are obsessing about the pen and don't see the hand, They're angry at the pen. But what they're really angry is at the hand writing the pen. They're just not aware. So they're ignorant in that way. And this is true certainty. And this is the fruit of certainty, the first type of certainty. And it's its spirit and the benefit of it. ومهما تحقق أن الشمس والقمر والنجوم والجماد والنبات والحيوان كل مخلوق فهي مسخرة بأمره حسب تسخر القلم في يد الكاتب. Once you realize this, that the sun, the moon, the stars, animate things, vegetables, animals, every created thing is subjugated to His command based on the qalam that's in the hand of the one writing the existence. وأن القدرة الأزلية هي المصدر للكل, and that it is the eternal power of God that is the source of all things. استولى على قلبه غلبة توكلي ورضا وتسليم. Then your heart is overwhelmed with trust in Allah, with contentment with Allah, and resignation of the decree of Allah. وصار موقنا بريئا من الغضب والحقد والحسد وسوء الخلق فهذا أحد أبواب اليقين. And his heart becomes certain, and it becomes free of this anger, this resentment, this rancor, this envy, and this bad character. And this is one of the doors of certainty. An amazing statement. This amazing statement. And then another fruit of certainty is that you don't worry about your provision because you know Allah will take care of you. And another one is that you know with certainty that anybody that does an atom's weight of good will see it, and anyone that does an atom's weight of evil will see it. So you become certain that Allah will reward the good and He will punish the wicked. And you will see that the ma'asi are like poison and deadly snakes that lead to destruction, and you will avoid them. So the fruit of all of this is you're sincere in guarding your presence with Allah, in your movements, in your stillness, in your thoughts. And you will have taqwa and piety and avoid sinfulness, and your certainty will be strong. And from that yaqeen, that certainty, you will know that Allah sees you in all states, that He even sees your thoughts, your innermost thoughts and ideas. And this will remove doubt. And the fruit of this is that when you are alone, you will have adab with your Lord. You will be like sitting in the presence of a great king who's looking at you. You will be humbled and low, and you will be calm and collected. And you will always have this comportment, and you will carry yourself with it. And you will be concerned about adorning your internal states, because just as we adorn our outward states for God's creation, but we adorn our inward states for the Creator. So just as people dress well, they check how they look before they go out for the creation, they check their hearts for the Creator. And then the ninth is that he should be munkasir, broken. He should be quiet. He should have awe. He should have huzn. You know, it's not depression, but it's gravitas. There's weight to this person. He's not a frivolous person. And then he mentions that there's three types of learned. The one who knows the command of God, and he knows the days of God. And these are the muftun, the people of fatwa, of legal opinion about halal and haram. And this type of knowledge does not give awe in the heart. And there is a scholar a learned who knows God, but doesn't know God's rulings. I mean, he knows or she knows just the basics, and they don't know the days of God. And these are the general believers. And then there's the one who knows God, and who knows the days of God, and the affair of God, and these are the siddiqun, the truthful ones. So those are the three. And the days of God mean ayyam Allah wa dhikkirhum bi ayyamillah. The Quran says those are reminding people what happens when people disobey Allah from the Quran. Reminding them what happened to Fir'aun, reminding them what happened to Qarun, reminding them what happened to Bal'am, all these things. And Omar said, learn knowledge and learn with it dignity and forbearance. Be humble to those who learn from you, and let those who learn be humble towards those they learn from. And don't be tyrants in your learning. Imam al-Awza'i, the great Lebanese, he was from Syria and then he moved to Lebanon. He said, people look at police and they say, A'udhu Billah. Nothing's changed. People look at shorti, at the police, and they say, A'udhu Billah. He said, but really they should do that when they see scholars of this world. They should hate them more than they hate police. And part of the reason for that is that because when people stop regulating themselves, you get more police. When people are self-regulating, you don't need police. When people stop regulating themselves, then the police show up. And so it's because of the ulama who don't teach people to regulate themselves that you need police. So what you hate in the police is really hating the people that failed to raise people properly. And that's the job of the scholars. I'm almost done, yeah. Sayyidina Ali said, أَبْغَضُ الْخَلْقِ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى رَجُلٌ قَمَشَ عِلْمًا أَغَارَ بِهِ فِي أَغْبَاشِ الْفِتْنَةِ. The most odious to God is a man who gathers knowledge and then uses it to stir up fitna. Okay. I think I'll finish it tomorrow. Because the last chapter is very short. So, inshallah, we're going to finish the book. Kitab al-Ilm is useful. Any quick few questions? Comments? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How does the stone prevent the water? It just means that that place where the stone is, you can't take water from that place. That's all. That they're not benefiting, and they're not allowing others to benefit from that place. I mean, it's a metaphor. It's an analogy. Don't you take those two. Analogies break down. Everything breaks down if you press it too hard. The Prophet ﷺ said that towards the end of time, knowledge would be better than action. What did he mean by knowledge? Well, if you look, we've got action all over the place without knowledge. So you can see what a mess the world is in because there's no knowledge. So we wouldn't have these people doing all these odious things in the name of the religion if they had knowledge. So in that way, right now, it's better to learn because what the ummah is lacking is knowledge. We're ignorant. We're an ignorant ummah. We're ignorant of our religion. We're ignorant of the time we're living in. We don't know the time. It's important to know the time you live in. Where do we draw the line between yaqeen and ignorance, specifically in scholars? For example, when it comes to giving fatwa on issues. I mean, one of the things that he mentions in there, and it was actually the next section that I was getting to, he talks about that there are two types of people that came into this ummah that have corrupted it greatly. The first are scholars who think that what they know is the only true thing, and they reject everybody else's opinions. And he said that these people are just a disaster for the religion, because tolerance of different opinions is very important in our tradition. And these are things that people fight over, things like Mawlid. And the Mawlid is a mukhtalaf fihi. The majority of scholars permitted it. Yeah, there are some scholars that didn't. So if you don't want to do the Mawlid, that's fine. You don't have to do it. It's fine. But leave the other people alone that want to celebrate the Prophet's birthday, because they have their proofs from the ulama. Imam Suyuti wrote a very famous fatwa about it in Al-Hawi. So it's just better. If you don't want to, that's fine. But don't say yours is the only opinion. Just say, this is what I think. I prefer this opinion. I recognize other scholars have said this. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. I saw a fatwa recently, because all fatwas say Allahu a'lam at the end. I saw a fatwa recently that just said, it didn't have Allahu a'lam. It just ended by saying, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. It was amazing. I was thinking, subhanAllah. Like, what is that? You know, there's little things you know when people aren't trained by real knowledge. I'm going to give you an example. If you see somebody put somebody before Malik, like they put Al-Bukhari before Malik or Imam Ahmed, it's a sign that they're not trained. If you see them write S-A-L, what do they write? Sa'lam, you know? S-A-W, it's a sign they're not trained. The ulama said it's bukhal to do that. You don't even have the generosity to write the whole thing out. Muhaddithun considered it makruh to do that. You know? But those are little signs that you know that people, and if you don't know those things, then why are you writing? Go study. You know, there's no, the nice thing about our religion, there's no monopoly. Anybody can become a scholar if you're willing to put in the energy, the time. I mean, obviously you have to have some ability, but people can do that. But this need for everybody, I mean, this age that we're living in is so strange because everybody has to have an opinion. I mean, you should read, there was an essay written back in the 30s called Balderdash that was rewritten by a philosopher recently, and he entitled it BS, but the whole thing was spelt out. But it's an interesting argument. It's worth reading. He just argues, why is there so much BS out there? Like, why is the world filled with so much BS? And part of it, he just concludes that people think they have to have an opinion about everything. That people just can't say, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. Why do I have to have an opinion? People ask me my opinion of Turkish politics. I don't know. There's people that get PhDs in Turkish politics. Go ask that guy. Why are you asking me? I read The Economist? I know something? I can't read Turkish, so I don't know what they're saying. I only know what these sinister people in England are saying about them, and I don't trust them. Right? I mean, do you really trust somebody that writes for The Economist? You know, or Time, or Newsweek? Like, you trust these sources? The New York Times? All the news is fit to print according to us. Right? So, I mean, if you don't know something, just say, I don't know. La adri. There's no shame. The shame is in, like, espousing opinions about something you know nothing about. We all do it at one time or another. I'm guilty of it, just like everybody else. But you should at least regret it. Like, why did I say anything? I shouldn't have said it. I should have just said, I don't know. Why did I say anything? Right? And then you can have opinions, like you can be read about things. I have certain opinions about things that I've read about. I have opinions about homeopathy or allopathic medicine or acupuncture, or maybe they're true, maybe they're not. You know, the whole world is so weird. Right? It's really, there's so many weird things out there. I don't know. You know, the only thing, like, I'm certain, some people, modern people don't like this man. I'm certain that this man got it right. Like, I'm certain about it. That's how I feel about him. I trust him as a source. I know some of his hadiths are weak. Some of them are even considered fabricated. I know that. I'm aware of that. But I never saw any hadith that I always liked them. You know, even the ones that were considered fabricated, they seem wise sayings at least. But maybe they shouldn't be attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. If you know they're not, then they shouldn't be. But usually al-Iraqi said, لم أجد له أصلا. He has adab with the Imam. He says, I didn't find any source for this. The modern ones, you know what they write? لا أصل له. There's no source for it. How do you know? What? You learned all the hadith? You learned all 55,000 hadith? MashaAllah, with all the and then all the hadith that were lost in our history during the Mongol invasion, all those books that were lost. You learned all those? MashaAllah. It's like the man who in Imam Abu Dawood's book, Aridat al-Ahwadi, about Tirmidhi, it's in Tirmidhi's collection, about Imam Zuhri was in the masjid, and Aisha relates a hadith that the Prophet did one taslima. It's a weak hadith in Tirmidhi, but the Malikis took the action, because in Medina, they only did one taslima. They said, Assalamu alaikum, one time. That was the action of the people of Medina. Imam Malik says, that's stronger than ahad hadith for me. You know, these solitary narrations from other places. I found all the tabi'een doing this in Medina. They got it from the Sahaba. Sahaba got it from the Prophet. This is what I'm going to do. That's his methodology. So Az-Zuhri, who's his teacher, he's one of Malik's teachers, he saw a man say, in Medina, he's in the masjid, he said, Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum. He did it twice. He said, called him up. He said, where'd you get that taslima from? So the man was from Iraq and he was knowledgeable. He said, an fulan, an ibn Mas'ud. He said, I don't know that hadith. Zuhri, he said, I don't know that hadith. So the man said, do you know all the hadith? He said, no. He said, do you know 2/3 of the hadith? He said, no. He said, do you know half of the hadith? He said, yes. He said, put it in the half you don't know. And so, ضحك الزهري, Imam Zuhri laughed. He had a good sense of humor. He didn't get angry. He said, yeah, you're right. But these guys, no, we know everything. We've got Google. We can search the hadith. Oh, it says it's not there. My goodness. It's amazing. Seriously, they check the Google hadith. They think that's it. Because it's not on Google, it can't be a hadith. I'll do the muraqabah. This is a question about muraqabah when I do the Ibn Ashur, inshallah. What can we do to make sure that knowledge does not start to lose its effect? Well, I mean, we have to تعرضوا لنفحات الله. You know, it's you have to have the raqa'iq, those things that ترقق القلب, things that are brittle on the heart. Reading the tabaqat is important. Reading about the righteous is important. Reading the seerah is important. The Prophet said, if you can't cry, at least pretend to cry when you're alone, because that can affect the heart. Even like actors, when they cry, they think about negative things that they've experienced or something. They can bring tears. And some are very good at it, others aren't. So, you know, that's a practice. It's a spiritual practice to do that. But that's when you're alone. It's not like when you're in everybody's crying, so you think you should be crying too. You know, Allah, adhaka wa abka. He makes you cry, He makes you laugh. Allah does that. We can't control the heart in that way. But the Prophet ﷺ said to make dua when you're crying. So if you start crying about anything, like your cat dies, you start crying, it's a time to make dua because the heart is open. That's what tears are. They're a sign that something cracked inside the heart. And that's the tears spill out. And there's a statement that Allah is with the brokenhearted. I mean, He designed the world to break our hearts because He's with the brokenhearted. So the world is literally designed to break our hearts. And so when people let you down, just accept it and know that they were designed to let you down. The only one that won't let you down is Allah, and then by extension His Prophet ﷺ, because He's acting on His behalf, and all the prophets.
I had a question about adab from the student to the teacher. In a lot of cases, the teacher does not want to be shown adab. So what is the student supposed to do?
I think, a lot of this is urf. Okay, so you have customs. We're Western people by and large, and we probably err on the side of not having a lot of respect for elders, that's the type culture that we live in. For those people that have come from South Asia, there's a lot of adab in the South Asian culture tradition, even in the language. The Malay culture, to say a bad person in Malay is bi-adab. They don't have any adab. So that's a pretty negative thing to say about somebody. So those things go under urf. And then the ulama are different, the students of knowledge. Like those of us teaching here, unfortunately, we used to have much bigger scholars like Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya. We're really more students of knowledge. You know, seriously, I consider myself a student of knowledge. The people here, Imam Afroz, you know, we don't have any claims. You know, we're students of knowledge. Alhamdulillah, we've been fortunate to be able to learn and sit with masters. But I'm not saying this out of humility. I'm really not. I am not saying this out of humility. I know what I know in relation to what Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya knows. Outwardly, I mean, inwardly, God knows the difference. But outwardly, I can't even compare myself like as a drop, because I know what he knows. I know the minhaj, I know what they studied, I know what he memorizes, and I've spent a lot of time with him and asked him a lot of questions. I know what Shaykh Salih al-Ghursi knows, who's here in Kunya. You know, I read his books, so I know what you're looking at. So though, you know, those people, maybe when I'm 70 or 80 years old, if I ever get that old, you know, then you can kiss my hand or whatever. I mean, then it's just old age, and it's just a nice thing to do for old people anyway, right? You know, not just the scholars, just because they made it. I mean, in this planet, you get to be 80, you deserve, you know, that people stand up for you. So, but, you know, people have good adab. Everybody here has good adab. I haven't seen any bad adab. Really, I haven't seen any bad adab. Don't think you have bad adab. Inshallah, you're all good people and you have good adab. But we have to be wary of obsequiousness, this kind of slavishness. Some of our cultures have overdone that thing, and it's not a healthy thing for the people, for the teacher. It's just not healthy. The Prophet said it's enough of a fitna for people to say, oh, there goes Fulan when he passes by. It's a fitna. And those are real. So we should be aware of that as well. The best respect you can show to a teacher is to apply what they've taught you. I mean, that's the best reward that you can give a teacher, is to apply, because he's going to get a reward for that. If you apply what he taught you, he's going to get a reward for that. So that's how I would look at it, you know. And then we should, if the teacher doesn't have respect for you as well, one of my favorite stories, and this really had a profound effect on me personally. I read a book by one of the scholars from Al-Ahsa who spent a lot of time with Habib Abdullah al-Haddad, the great mujaddid of Hadramaut. And he said one day they went to this village and they prayed Fajr at the masjid. And when they came out, you know, they stayed until Shuruq. And when they came out, all the people came out, and he stayed and he greeted every single one of them. And when they left, the man turned to him and he said, you know, Habib, you could have just waved to them, they would have been happy, but each one you greeted separately. And he said, why were they waiting there, each one, wanting to greet me? He said, because they think you're close to God. And he said, shouldn't I reciprocate? Like, shouldn't I think that about them? There's a beautiful saying that attributed to the Prophet, لا خير في صاحب لا يرى فيك ما ترى فيه. There's no good in a companion that doesn't see in you what you see in him. And if you look at this, there's people here that, you know, you might not have the outward knowledge. I mean, alhamdulillah, I've been afforded time. People have helped me in my life. I mean, I had 10 years, people supporting me. When I went to the Muslim world, people supported me. You know, I was very fortunate. A lot of people want to study. They don't have that opportunity. And that was a gift. And people have helped me to study and read and do those things. But there's people that don't, they could know God, be alim billah, even though they don't have a lot of that. No, that's what he said, the three. You have a scholar who doesn't know God, but he knows the rulings of God. And then you have a knower of God, but he doesn't know the rulings of God, other than what he needs for his fardain. And then you have the one that knows both. And that's the siddiq, that's a high maqam. So, we don't know who's close to Allah. We don't know. That's something Allah has hidden in His creation. And we should just, when you meet people, you should just assume good things about them. And even the bad ones you meet, the door of Tawbah might come to them at some time. They might actually be beloved of God even in their odious state at the time. Because Allah is not in time. He knows the reality of people. He knows their essences. And Omar was beloved of God when he was, an idolater in Mecca. He was still beloved of God. Because he was Omar. He's not Omar in these... I mean, this is a khilaf in the Maturidi and the Ash'ari schools. But I incline towards that opinion, that it's Sa'id fi batni ummihi or Shaqi fi batni ummihi. So it's, there's a khilaf about that. Do you say ana mu'min insha'Allah, or do you say ana mu'min? And it's based on the hal and the ma'al, and it's a khilaf amongst the theologians.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
You were just saying about scholars who goes to ruler and opposite.
Yeah.
What about scholars who become ruler?
A scholar who becomes ruler? Well, again, it's niyyah. Like, to be honest with you, and I understand why they did that, and there's definitely big dangers of that, but people need to also be in these places. I don't want to be that person, but there are people that have to engage these people, and there are always going to be scholars that go and are with the rulers. Some of them have good intentions, other ones just want the dunya. There's people that, it's better to think well of them. But if I would rather have a knowledgeable person in power than an ignorant person, right? I'd rather have a scholar in power than somebody who's not, because knowledge is a light, and it might help them or guide them. So. But power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. And the Prophet, there are hadiths that indicate in the Quran wa sultana sayaftariqani. The Quran and the authority are going to go separate ways. Faduru haythu dar al-Quran washtanibu sultan. Go with the Quran and avoid the sultan. And that's the best policy. But there are people that, I mean, for me personally, like Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, I've seen him go in. He definitely doesn't do it on a regular basis, and he doesn't like to do it. And I've seen how agitated he gets, because I know his level. But he always has a niyyah when he goes in, and he doesn't go seeking anything from them, but he goes with the intention of nasiha. I mean, he's a whole other level for me, because he's been just working on his nafs for decades. And he's in his 80s. He's not, at which point, he doesn't, there's nothing in dunya he wants. I mean, his house, he could have a very nice house. If you go to his house in Jeddah, you'd be amazed. He lives in the same house he's been in for the last, 30 years. Right? If he wanted to have a big house and everything, he could do all that. He doesn't care. His favorite place is a tent in the Mauritanian desert. That's where he feels most happy when he goes. He told me recently he just wants to leave the world and go teach children Quran, And we're the ones pushing him. Like, we're literally, no, Sheikh, you have to stay. We're the ones pushing him. He's like, in Mauritania, the ulama, when they get in their later age, they really tend to just disengage from the world. But there's so few scholars out there of his caliber. I mean, I don't see any really. I haven't met any Sunni scholars that I would consider at his caliber. And I know a lot of them. And I've read their books. So, there might be some in certain knowledges, but in terms of the comprehensive level, I haven't met anybody at his level, personally. And that's not because he's my sheikh. No, he's my sheikh because of that. Literally. I'm not saying that because he's my sheikh. He's my sheikh because I believe that. Or I would go and find somebody else. But something like that, I'm glad he's foreign minister. I'd much rather have a philosopher as a foreign minister than some idiot. You know, seriously. And he loses sleep at night. I mean, he asks us to make dua for these Turkish diplomats that were taken by these people in Iraq. You know, and they're you know, everybody's clamoring about the Yazidis, and it's a crime against the Yazidis. The Yazidis have been there for centuries, and the Muslims left them alone. They're not devil worshippers. You know, it's an amalgam of different, you know, Christianity and Islam and Zoroastrianism, but nobody cares about the Muslims. You know, I mean, there's been tens of thousands of Muslims killed by these people, or the Shia Muslims. You know, they're killing Shia Muslims. So, you know, we should pray. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, just a few announcements, please. If everybody can just pay attention, there's a few important announcements. First of all, Imam Zaid's one-on-one sessions are tomorrow, inshallah, from 3 to 4:30 p.m. So if you have signed up, just go to the designated area, inshallah. The Khatam Quran, if you have signed on to read a juz, just make sure that you complete that, inshallah, by tomorrow afternoon. Go ahead and check that off when you're done.